right, so like most anything, first thing I'm going to say is you have to read your seed packets. You need to read your instructions. And I really hate that because if I've always planted tomatoes, I know how to do tomatoes. But what I really want to know is how long it takes them to germinate, to pop up out of the ground. And as soon as I plant them, the next day I'm out there looking, which is ridiculous. That's okay. You want to know how far before your first frost date they can go in the ground. Now, tomatoes and peppers, they need warm soil. So I always start mine inside. But things like sugar snap peas, I mean, putting them in the ground right now is not necessarily a bad thing. So you have to read your seed packets, like I said. Find out how long the germination period, the maturity is. Because there's a few things up here, since we're higher elevations than like Bay Area, they may never get completely ripe if they have a super long growing season. So anyway, that's, read your packets. Know what your first frost date is for the area that you're in. For Sonora, it tends to be May 25. And so you don't want to plant anything outside that's going to get frosted. Where we are, which is a little bit higher up, my husband and I, we really can't plant before June 1st. And that being said, as far as I'm concerned, for growing things, you need to experiment too. And tell yourself, if you're trying something you've never done before, hey, this is an experiment. If it works, great. If it doesn't, well, maybe I learned something. And so I tend to try and get some kind of seed that I haven't grown before, but I'm pretty sure my tomatoes are going to make it. And that's my main thing. I love fresh tomatoes, and I don't like grocery store tomatoes. So it's knowing your frost date. And if there are if you have the ability to do it, then you can start your seeds inside. You need to know what temperature of soil that seeds need to germinate, and that'll be on those seed packets or on the Focus seed site. There's a lot of information there, and then there's always Google. So I go to some of the like Gurney's or something like that, and they will tell me a little bit more. Pepper seeds, for instance, won't germinate if the soils aren't around 70 degrees or 75. So you really need something like a really good, well, if you keep your house warm, that might be nice, but most of us don't keep it that warm. But heating pads like this are not terribly expensive, and they go underneath your trays. And then you can get them to be 75 degrees, 70 to 75, which is what I've got going at home right now. Peppers are another thing that need, like, let me see if this says, a lot of days for maturity. These jalapenos are 72 days to mature. So from the time that you get them in the ground until you've actually got fruit. The hotter the pepper, the more days they need. So if you're going to go ghost peppers, I don't know why you would, but if you were going to grow ghost peppers, you need to get them started pretty quick. So I was going to show you some of the tools that I've got to start seeds. And the first thing is you need some kind of a tray. So I brought recyclable things that I've got for people that don't want to go spend money on all of the neatest, greatest things. But I generally start my seeds in little 1-inch pots or 4-inch pots. And depending on, again, the instructions, I should get out the soil. If I could stop being nervous, I wouldn't bounce around so much. So you start with good potting soil. This happens to be from Mother Lode Hydroponics. It's on Tuolumne Road in Sonora. There's also, most of the good nurseries will have the good soils. Happy Frog is one of my favorites. And the hydroponics, Mother Lode Hydroponics happens to have their own brand of that doesn't cost as much. I've got them from the Nursery and Standard and the Garden Shop, which is also, well, because I'm from Sonora, then this is Sonora stuff. But the Garden Shop that's on Via Esta, they have great people to help you through things too. So I start with a good garden soil, and then to that you add something called vermiculite or perlite. This garden soil happens to have some perlite in it. Anyway, it looks like little styrofoamy white rocks. But the vermiculite, I mix it 1/3 with 2/3 soil, and that's an approximate. It gives the seeds air as well as moisture control to help them germinate. And so then mixing those two together and then putting them in the pots gives you, and I generally moisten my soil too to start with. Although with seeds, as long as they're going to get watered, that's fine, you know. But I don't know, I like to give them a little head start. So then you're going to fill your pots with the soil up to half inch to the top, something like that. It's not an exact science. Most of the garden seeds we're working with do not need to be pre-treated with anything. Tomatoes, peppers, but again, read your information on the kind of seed in case you got something that likes to be soaked a little before you put it in ground. That might be sugar snap peas. There's a few things that take a little more creativity to get them to sprout. They may need to be refrigerated in paper towels for a couple of months, or they may need to be scraped. But there's none of the seeds that I'm personally sowing this year that need that kind of treatment. So the Asclepias, though, I told somebody last year when we did this talk, somebody taught me how to get milkweed to sprout. And it was putting it in a wet paper towel in a plastic bag in the refrigerator for somewhere between 4 to 6 weeks. Seemed like it was forever. But then you plant it in the soil and they came up. It was amazing. Okay, so back to planting. And I'm going to just get my hands dirty because it'll help me. All right, so you're going to fill these pots with soil. Make use of this tablecloth that I brought so I wouldn't get their place all dirty. All right. And then if you're doing something like tomato seeds, they will tell you that they need to be covered by about 1/4 inch of soil. And so with that little bit, it's better if the soil starts out a little bit damp, so you've got a foundation that you know you're working with. Sprinkle the seeds on top, and then put about 1/4 inch of soil on top of those seeds. And I take something like this, because I tend to start more things than I have room to grow. And I fill them with these little pots, and then this will hold the water. With a heating pad underneath this, then I tend to keep about an inch of water in the bottom of this. And then you're not disturbing the seeds by watering them on top. You're watering them from underneath. And so it'll wick up into the pots, keep them just about the right temperature. And then I have, thanks to my husband, I have this. I put the water in the tray. That's a great question. How many seeds per pot? I give myself, tending to be a little pessimistic, I figure 50% germination. So, that being said, when I did my tomato seeds, because I started them a couple of weeks ago, which, by the way, is too early, but I'm doing it anyway, I put 3 seeds in each corner, and I got 3 tomatoes out of every single pot. So then, and that's a great question, I would recommend 2, just because. But once those are up and they've got their first true leaves, because the first leaves that come out are just basically from the seed. They're little oval, tiny leaves for the tomatoes, and squash, is probably about the size of a pumpkin seed. But once the first true leaves are up, or even possibly 2 of them, then you can divide them. And dividing them is basically just being careful of the roots. I have a group of young people that we work with some to teach them how to garden and just get the excitement and wonder of seeing something pop up that just seems like a miracle to me. So when I do that, I take some kind of a tray and we divide them onto a damp tray so that those little baby roots are not hitting concrete and sucking all the water and life out of them before you get them in the soil. But it's not difficult. And that way, if you get 100% germination, which is what we're hoping for most of these seeds, the freebies, they're saying 50%. And we'll see. Gosh. Okay, so, yes. They were iffy last year? Oh, I'm supposed to do this. Shoot. Okay.
Oh, I have some seeds from last year. Are they still good?
It depends on the seed, whether they're good or not. But the only ones that I know that really don't last more than a year are onion seeds. Tomatoes, as long as they've been kept at not real hot temperatures. So I never throw my seeds away until they're 10 years old, and then I know I've hung on to them too long. So be that as it may, since this isn't exactly a transplanting class, once you've got your water in here and you're not watering from the top down, you're watering from the bottom up so you don't disturb the seeds, especially if they're little ones, then you cover either this with your tray, whatever you've got. You're going to cover it with plastic, or if you've got one of something like this, then it holds the moisture in. These actually have little vents in them to let the air out. And then you're going to need to provide them with light. Now, if you've got a good sunny window that you can put them in, that works. I have grow lights. And the grow lights also add heat. They're, again, something I got at I think I got them at Motherlode Hydroponics. Actually, my husband bought them, but they work really great. And where my germination dates on my seeds say 6 to 10 days, usually by day 4 or 5, my seeds are up. So, but that's an expense, and you may not need to do that. So again, you can cover it with plastic that keeps the moisture in, and that helps germinate the seeds. So that's what you're doing for that. I should pause and say, any other questions? Hang on a second.
I've heard different theories about using potting soil versus regular soil. What's the difference there?
Okay, so potting soil versus regular soil. Except for planting directly in the ground, I have had terrible luck with regular soil. It's, for one thing, it compacts too hard. And this stuff is really fluffy. You can come and look at it afterwards. Because seeds need soil, nutrition, they need air, they need water, they need sun. And I think the air is the problem with planting them right in regular soil.
Why do you put in there?
Yeah, that's a good question.
How much?
Yeah.
Okay, I usually do about a third or a little less vermiculite to the potting soil. And at the garden shop, I bought, well, only because it's all they had, but I have this enormous bag of vermiculite. It weighs almost nothing, which is nice, and it lasts forever. I've had it for 3 years. I'm almost done because I've been sharing some, but it's cheap. Yes.
When do you need to add nutrients?
Usually when you transplant, you're going to add a little nutrient to it, or, I don't know what the formula is for that. Does anybody, when you add nutrients? Yeah, fertilizer.
I just read the container on the fertilizer, and then that's what I mix it.
Yeah. So you don't fertilize to germinate the seeds, but after they've been in there for, I would say, a month to, 4 weeks or so, then you probably want to give them a little extra. Usually, when I divide them and transplant them into bigger pots, and that would be like these 4-inch pots for each plant, then I figure I'm adding more soil and that fertilizes them. But that is not a Master Gardener recommendation. That's me being a little bit lazy. So, anything else?
Tell me that's it. This whole thing is less than $5.
Oh, okay. So my husband just told me this setup right here is less than $5. The lid and the tray, and I got it from Motherlode Hydroponics. I love that store. Where is that? It's on Tuolumne Street. If you're coming from, are you coming from Sonora? Okay, so it's before you get to Standard. It's about halfway between the CVS Pharmacy exit and Standard Road. Before you get to what? Before you get to Steve's place. Does it? Oh, okay. Yeah. And check to see when they're open. They're not open either on Mondays or Tuesdays. Something weird. Well, my opinion. Yeah. Oh, not so much. As long as it's posted, they're generally there. Okay, let me see. So this is very cool. The LED lights are a little more, but between the heating pads and those LED lights, then they don't get quite so straggly. And I had to rescue some from the kids that we're working with. They didn't even have them in front of a window, and the tomatoes had gotten probably 3 times what they needed to be. So one of the nice things about tomatoes specifically, and this is again about transplanting and then putting them outside, is most plants want to be planted the same depth they were when they were in the pot. Not so with tomatoes. Tomatoes like to be planted up to the first sets of leaves, deeper. And the documentation or the research that I've done on tomatoes actually made the statement that tomatoes love to be transplanted, which It's kind of a shocking statement if you ask me, but I did. I retransplanted all of those. I think there's 20 of them, and they are so strong and robust. I would say don't do that with most of your plants, but it works really well with tomatoes and probably peppers also, since they are also a, what's the name of the, anyway, they're in the same family. I had a thought. So keep track of the water in these, because once they get a little more robust, then they're going to really suck up water. Because I started my tomatoes so early, I'm probably going to have to repot them into half-gallon or gallon containers before it's time for me to put them out, which is going to be a pain. Then when you're getting kind of close to time to put them out, then you need to, what's the word? You need to harden them off, because they've been in the house all this time. So there's a couple of ways to do that. If you've got a nice windowsill, you can put a fan on them so that they actually move around, and that helps the stems get stronger. I also start setting them outside in the mornings when the sun isn't quite so harsh, and leave them out for an hour the first time, wait a couple of days maybe. The first 2 or 3 days, put them out for very short, and each day then increase that amount so that when they get stuck out there in, you know, the blazing hot sun, they're not shocked and die. Does that make sense? Any more questions? Nope. Okay. Yes.
Heating pad, how can you use that with water?
Oh, okay. So the heating pad actually goes underneath this tray. And it says not to get it wet, but in my seed starting house, there's so much moisture in it right now that it still is getting water underneath it, and it hasn't killed it. And this is at least the second year I've used these same heating pads. So, but yeah, you really don't want water. You're not going to submerge it. That'd be a bad idea. Okay. What else? Watering. Yes.
If it says like 70 days to germination, does that mean if you plant the seed, you have to wait 70 days to see it pop out of the soil?
Yes, but germination is what you're looking for to see it pop out of the soil. Maturity, which is usually the 70 days, is when you're going to get fruit. Yeah. There are a few things that take that long to germinate. I don't have the patience to do that. Okay, and then there are some things that you just have to plant outside. For one thing, carrots have a taproot, and you can maybe get away with transplanting them when they're only about this high, but it's not a good idea. There's a lot of seed packets that tell you if outside is recommended. And there are some things, well, like squashes. If you look at your squash packets, it says plant them outside. Well, you probably know as well as I do, you go into the nurseries, you can see squashes there. So it's doable. But if you've got soil that's warm enough and you're past the first frost date, try it. You know, put them in a pot and see what happens. We grew a lot of zucchini last year from something that was already started in pots. I don't know what time it is. Tools. Well, I've kind of showed you my favorite tools as far as this is concerned, which is these guys. I have an actual regulator on my heating pad and my lights as well. So my lights are on one of the, the regulators that you use for your Christmas tree or your Christmas tree lights. Yeah. I have a new cord that'll actually let me program how warm my soil is. It's got a probe in it and everything. I don't remember how much we paid for it, but it sure takes the guesswork out of keeping the soil at a particular temperature. So I've got it set to be between 65 and 75 degrees, and it'll regulate it that way, which is probably why I get germinating happening so quickly. You know, I'm not sure about that. I haven't done it without some kind of a regulator, and I should have said something about that first, because they'll just keep sitting there and heating up. So you're going to need that, and talk with one of the guys at any of the good nurseries around here. They can help you with that. There's one more thing I thought I was going to say. Oh, labeling. Gosh. All right, so labeling's really important, because I guarantee that when you put it in there and 3 weeks have passed, you are going to forget what date you put them in, and maybe even what you planted. There's all kinds of labels. I bought these in bulk from Amazon, and they're a nice height, so that works well. If you label stuff in your garden, you probably know a lot of times the words disappear with a Sharpie. And these guys are called garden markers, and they're sun resistant. And they've lasted really, really well. So they're one of my favorite things, as silly as that sounds. Yeah.
I throw this out. You probably noticed it too. Have you noticed that the growing season pattern has changed? So you can't use the same thing you were thinking years ago now, because tomatoes last longer into the season. So I think people should be more aware of what the environment is doing when they start planting their seeds, like you're doing seeds early this year with your tomatoes. That makes sense?
Yeah. He was saying that the growing seasons have changed. Yeah.
Rotate your crops.
Oh, rotating your crops. Yeah, you're really supposed to rotate your crops if you're using raised beds. That's it's a little, well, it's tricky for me because I grow too many tomatoes. I don't have new places to put them. So you can refeed with compost and soup up your soil, but switching them back and forth, like between beans or peas, which put nitrogen back in the soil, and then tomatoes, which suck everything out of the soil. Really good idea. Yeah.
Strawberry. What about strawberry beds? I know this isn't planting seeds.
Yeah, with strawberry beds, you're just going to have to fertilize. I mean, you can't. Well, I'm going to relocate mine this year because they've taken over one of my raised beds, and yeah. So we're going to experiment with putting them in the ground and hoping the gophers don't eat them all. Yeah. No, I'm not talking about gophers. Yes. Potatoes. We have a couple of people here that know a lot about potatoes, but I have grown them. One of the recommendations is to do them one of the big pots. Honestly, last year I put mine under my tomatoes. I put them in the bed, I grew tomatoes over them, and I got potatoes. They weren't the most gorgeous potatoes you've ever seen, but they were potatoes. And the tomatoes shaded them so that the leaves didn't get all killed off. So I think, is it time? It must be, I'm talked out. Seed prep, index, germination, taproots. I guess the only other thing is just to think about beneficials when you're planting. Things that will repel insects, like marigolds are great. Supposedly, marigolds are great for repelling things like earwigs, Maybe, I don't remember. I just know they're supposed to be really good, and I'm going to plant them. Borage is one of the herbs they've probably got over there that attracts bees. So you got your pollinators, and they reseed themselves really well. I'm going to have to pull out about 24 of them this year because they're taking over. But things like that to just keep in mind. And as far as I'm concerned, flowers like zinnias, they are also a good, they attract the beneficials, and they also repel some of the insects. And besides, they just look good when you're waiting for this little color to pop up because you're waiting for tomatoes that aren't going to be ready until September or something.
I have more question. What about volunteers from last year's garden? Are those hardy?
It depends on the volunteer. My experience is because a lot of our stuff doesn't breed true. Most of my volunteer tomatoes tend to be cherry tomatoes, unless you've planted heirlooms like Brandywine or something like that. They breed true. So it's just the kids that we work with. Last year they had cantaloupes come up volunteer, and from the compost that we had made. They were the best cantaloupes I've ever tasted, and I have no idea they were just volunteers. So if you've got room for it, I think having volunteers occasionally is great. And we always have at least one cherry tomato because my husband loves tomato hornworms. They make sphinx moths. And so when I find tomato hornworms on my tomato plants, they go on the sacrificial cherry tomato, which has nothing to do with seed starting. Is anything else? And you're welcome to. Huh?
I put the tomato worms on the bird feeder for the bird.
Or give them to chickens. All right. Thank you guys very much.